Welcome to the Choose to Be podcast. Thank you for joining our conversation today. We're so glad you are with us. We are talking about trust today. And I was telling Alana, we've got some vacations and stuff coming up. And, anyways, I was like, maybe I'll just jump on and talk about The Elements of Trust by Brene Brown. And she's like, no, I want to talk about that with you. I want to have that conversation. So it's such a good one. What I'm referring to is the work of Brene Brown, who talks about the elements of trust, different characteristics and behaviors that make up a trusting relationship. And she uses the acronym BRAVING, BRAVING, braving. And I love that because it's brave to trust. That's how she phrases it. And I'm like, oh, it totally is. And it's really brave to trust again. So we want to go through today and break apart these different elements of trust that she has lined out. But there's some things in there, as I've used this for years now, this acronym in the world of betrayal, divorce, some tweaks, because this isn't all the things. There are a lot of different things that make up and build and maintain trust. But this is just a fun way to start. So we're going to tackle that today.
You are right. I absolutely was like, do not do Brene Brown without me. If you've listened to Amy and I very long, we love Brene Brown. And I remember one time I was talking to a client about Brene Brown's work, and she was still fairly new in her recovery journey. And I just said, you might not be ready for Brene Brown yet because all of what Brene Brown does is not betrayal trauma specific. But what is so amazing about Brene Brown's work is so much of it just goes across so many different disciplines and issues and things that come up. And so many people, everybody can relate to what she talks about because she is a researcher on shame and vulnerability. And so I love this concept of looking at trust and taking her foundational principles and then looking at it through the betrayal trauma lens. And I'll just say yes, trusting again after betrayal, whether or not we're even talking about trusting that partner, right? Maybe you've left the relationship, maybe you're still in the relationship, but even trusting yourself after betrayal, trusting friends, family, coworkers, strangers, trust across the board can get shattered. It can change your worldview of how you trust. And so I think as you're listening to this, wherever you're at with trust, I think this can be applicable.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it was our conference, our betrayal trauma conference that we had. Maybe it's been a year or two ago. We need to do another one. But that last conference we did, and I know they're still available on our website, some of those stops that we did individually. But so if you want to like hear the full enchilada here of what I'm going to share with you, you can go to that. But I like the analogy of the trust ladder, where in this relationship that I think all of you listening can relate to, you're on your way moving up this ladder as the relationship grows and escalates. And you think, you believe, you trust that your partner is on the upper ladder with you, next to you. And then when betrayal happens, when that trust is broken, you realize, holy bleep, he's actually fallen off the ladder. He is not trustworthy. I thought he was up here, but he's actually on the ground, broken bones, wounded, not trustworthy. And just that image, that imagery right there, and that whole like concept of, wait a second, I thought he was up here with me and he's not, is so traumatic. And what I'm hoping and what I want to help my clients do is avoid, because I did it, avoid throwing yourself off the ladder to join them down on the ground because you think that you can help fix their wounds and pull them back up that ladder together. And so, again, wherever you're at in this journey, I'd like to give that visual that, look, you did not do anything to become untrustworthy. You're on the ladder. You did not actually lose trust. You were trusting. You had someone take advantage of that and take advantage that they were slowly moving down that ladder. Even some when we talk about abuse, tricking you, manipulating you to believe that they're up there, but really they're moving slow, slow down. And it's just devastating. But for me, when I reframed that and realized, wait a second, I am a trusting person and there's nothing wrong with me. I've done all of the work and these elements that we're going to talk about today to be on that ladder. This person didn't. And when I started to really like accept that and lean into that, I could see that I can trust me. I can trust other people. It's this particular person who wasn't trustworthy. And so, anyways, there's a lot more to that analogy that I use, but I like that visual. I'm a visual learner, and that can really be helpful in this acronym that she uses. I We can take this all different directions, but I think I want to start with what a trusting relationship does look like with both people on that ladder. Like, what's required? What characteristics and what behaviors are required to both be on that ladder? Because I think sometimes we don't know quite what we're looking for, especially if you're in that situation where trust has been broken, breached big time. How do I know that he's trustworthy now? What does that even look like? So I think some of these concepts we're talking about will help.
Yeah, and for a lot of individuals, if they've never had a healthy relationship, I've had some who thought it was healthy, or but it wasn't, or I've had others who were never modeled what this looks like, or where it's never been an element, or where we have an individual who enters the marriage and pretended like they were on the ladder, but never actually had learned those skills on how to be a trustworthy individual. I see that frequently too. It can almost feel scary is the word I'm looking for. It can almost feel scary to some of these individuals who have betrayed of how do I get there?
Yeah.
How do I become this trustworthy person? How do I help my partner trust me again? How do we have this relationship you're talking about? There is this Bob Newhart. If you look on YouTube, there's this old video where he is a therapist and people come into him and she's like, "Therapist, I'm having a hard time with this and this. Can you give me advice?" And he's like, "Absolutely. Stop it." She's like, "But I'm trying." He's like, "I know. Stop it. Stop it." And the whole video is he's just like, "Stop it. Just stop it." And it's funny and it's painful because that is so often either what we tell ourselves or we tell our partner or other people in our life. Like, just stop it. Just be trustworthy. And
Mhm.
they're like, "I'm trying and I don't know how to do it." So I love that we're going to
Yeah.
slow it down, break it down, and give you a few things that you can actually look at and start practicing,
Yeah.
because more often than not, the individuals I see want to stop it.
Yeah, they do. And I love this because you can utilize this a lot more tangibly. Like, here's where I'm lacking in my trust with you. And it's very easy to then communicate with your partner. Here's where I'm specifically not trusting you in this reliability area or the boundary area. And it can really help. I honestly use this with my kids. Like my son Jackson, when I feel like, dude, you just totally blew my trust. The very first time I used it, I wrote out braving, wrote out the acronym, wrote out all of the different words and behaviors, and I said, and I circled boundaries, reliability. This is where I'm not trusting you and where you can do some work. He took that paper and put it on his wall, and he was consciously working on those things. Then I chose to look for the work, acknowledge the work, and it did. It rebuilt trust. So it can be really helpful.
I love that so much, and I'm thinking about my 18-year-old right now that I was like, "Ooh, I think this would be really beneficial," really with any of my kids, and Amy, there's so many things you do with your kids that I listen to and I'm like, "Oh, that's a great idea." So, I
Well,
love
I
it.
try. It doesn't mean they're going to stay out of jail, but I try. Okay. All right. So the first one, let's just dive right in. The first one, acronym braving B boundaries. So I can trust you if you are clear about your boundaries and you hold them, and you're clear about my boundaries and you respect them. If not, like there's no trust without boundaries.
Oh my gosh, we could spend a whole
I
episode
know. That's
on
why this is
just
going to be two
this.
parts.
I know, because A, So many of the people I've worked with who have struggled with sexually acting out, they have massive boundary issues where they don't know how to do basic boundaries, both for themselves
Right.
internally and also with the people around them. I
Right.
can't I probably every man that I've worked with who has struggled with sexually acting out, part of our work at some point has been around boundaries.
Yeah.
And so there you have that piece of it. And then there's this piece of you as a betrayed partner have to be able to also hold your own boundaries for them to be able to trust you, which I feel like it could be a whole like segment. And
Yes.
then them respecting your boundaries could be a whole segment. So it's like my brain is like, oh my word,
I
even
know.
in there's so many layers.
So many layers. And I think this is where, it's interesting you were talking about how a lot of the men you work with weren't taught, and from my observation, I think a lot of men figure out early how to use their charm to bust through a boundary. And you and I had a conversation just like in random. You remember this? About our sons in the grocery store, where both of our sons, like when we go to the grocery store with them, they just throw whatever they want in the cart and we'll do the whole Jackson, like, come on. And then they do this little cute charm thing and I end up buying it. It's like, whatever. Now, in large part, I will admit he's the last and I'm tired. There's this sense of charm. And then, like, my daughters throw it in the cart. I'm like, for now, put it back. And it's like, this is vulnerable for me to say, but look, I'm human and I acknowledge it. And you and I were talking about this. Like, we've got to stop it. But that's why I actually did this work with Jackson. And because I did notice, and I don't want to repeat that pattern that the world just accepts around young boys and men, that they can use their charm to get out of it. They can be nice, they can love bomb, whatever that looks like, and then we'll just cave. It honestly is a huge factor in pornography addiction, goes right into consent, sexual consent. It's the no, and then they just, "Oh, come on, you do wanna oh, come on," like, charm your way out of that boundary, out of that no. So, this is huge to me, and I know we could go on, but I think it's really important to recognize as a betrayed partner, how important it is to hold your boundary for that reason.
It's really interesting because as you were saying that around the consent, I know that some of you, like just hearing that little bit will be triggering. It will be triggering because you will recognize that's happened or happening. And I know our consent episode was insanely triggering for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And the reason it was so triggering is because we were tapping into patterns and dynamics that are happening. And so I want to give a little plug that
Yeah.
I know that it is super hard and tackle it when you're ready, but recognize that those parts that are showing up are those denial parts that aren't ready or don't want to see it because there's that happening,
Yeah.
because it needs to be addressed. So there's my plug. And even if that little bit that Amy just said there was triggering, I get it because it is so painful to recognize, even at a greater level, going back to our ladder analogy, that they are further down that ladder or on the ground than we think or are ready to see.
Yeah. Or are ready to see is huge. Totally validate that right there. And just FYI, there is a stages of denial video that you can download. It's very self-paced, not terribly long. That just goes through all the different stages of denial, how to work your way through that. If that's something that is of interest to you, you can go onto the website. I'll put the link in the show notes too. Okay, the next one is reliability. Oh my gosh, every single one of these, we could do a whole episode. I can trust you. I can only trust you if you do what you say you're going to do, and not just once, but over and over again. Because just once isn't enough. And it really is all the little things that help rebuild trust and maintain trust. This isn't a checklist. This isn't a, okay, we're both up on this ladder like I think we were supposed to be and want to be. And now we can just like live life. No, trust and all of these things we're talking about. are a constant maintenance in the relationship. This one I think is that has a lot to do with predictability too. Are they predictable? And I know in my first relationship, one of the hardest parts was his unpredictability. I never knew what I was going to get, who I was going to get, how the reaction or response was going to be in everything, in every situation, every scenario. There was not enough consistency, very impulsive. And that made it really, really scary to trust. So I think that predictability is huge.
That is a really important piece because there is a lot of it comes hand in hand with sexual compulsivity is this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde behavior.
Right.
And so then not knowing who you're going to get, that piece of it, consistency over time builds trust. And that doesn't even mean perfection over time. But consistency. More often than not, are they showing up and is that increasing more and more? And I see a lot of women really get caught up in as soon as he does something good, then they jump on the hope train and it's like, okay, now we're going to move forward. And if the pattern has been this inconsistency, like the consistency is inconsistency, and the pattern is, okay, he does really good for 2 weeks, but then he does really bad for 2 weeks. And then he does good for 2 weeks and bad for 2 weeks. But when that's the pattern, and then every time he does good, you feel hope again, and you jump on the hope train, and then you get knocked off of it, and then you jump on it, and then you get knocked off of it. We have to be able to pull back and look at patterns.
Yeah. That's why it's so important that analogy, that trust ladder is that you want to be where you're at and hold on so that you can watch and observe. If you are constantly jumping off, saying, okay, come on, we can do this for 2 weeks. And you're like getting them up there and you're on step three and you're like, okay, see, great. Oh, I can now see we're on the ladder. We're finally on the ladder. And then he falls off and then you jump off and then you, okay, 2 weeks, let's get back up. This exhausting.
Yep.
It is exhausting.
Physically exhausting, emotionally
Mentally,
exhausting.
all of it.
Yep.
And you can't see the pattern that you're talking about there when you're in it going back and forth because you're exhausted. So you want to be where you are, where you thought he was, to observe and watch his progress up the ladder. It is one step at a time, consistently over time. And I think when you're in that, when there is unpredictability, then it is natural to go in that self-protective mode to protect the self. And I think that's okay during this time. But you can't even protect yourself when you keep jumping off that ladder yourself. So I think this reliability is really important.
Yeah.
Okay. Accountability. I can only trust you when you own it, apologize for it, and make amends. I can only trust you when I make a mistake. I'm allowed to own it, apologize for it, and make amends. No accountability, no trust.
Oh, okay. I can see so many of my partners having an emotional response to
Yes. And this
this
is we're
part
going
of
to
it.
betrayal trauma this up.
Yeah. I think we should break it down to those 2 parts because I think yeah. Okay, so that first part, I can only trust you when you own it, apologize for it, and make amends. That, again, going back to those that I have worked with that have acted out, knowing how to own it, working through their own protectors to be able to own it, learning how to apologize and what amends actually looks like.
Which
And
you did
amends
an episode on, by the way, so they can go back and listen to that.
yeah, because amends is not just saying I'm sorry. And even saying I'm sorry is not just the simple words, I'm sorry.
Mm.
It's amends are really looking at here's what's happening and how it's connected to the past that makes it so painful today. And here's what my plan is for the future to help repair the damage I've done. Here's how I'm going to really own the impact.
Which I would say a full therapeutic disclosure would fall into this accountability section.
Oh, absolutely. And so all of the layers and levels to this, there's processes that most I'm not even gonna say most individuals who are going through this, I think just most individuals in general are never taught these emotional skills.
No.
unless you have something like this that propels you to go do this work. So this is where really groups that can teach you this or individual work is going to be so important.
Yeah, for sure. And then on the flip side, when Brene says, and I'm allowed, when I make a mistake, I'm allowed to own it, apologize for it, and make amends. What comes to my mind initially for this one is how often my mistakes, weaknesses would be used against me to the gaslight, the flipping, blame shifting. I wasn't I wanna say I wasn't allowed to apologize. I would apologize, I would make amends, I would feel, do all the things, and yet I say I wasn't allowed in that it wasn't accepted, it was weaponized.
Weaponized. Yep.
And so I
Yeah.
think that's an important piece in this trusting relationship is that your true accountability, amends, apology is not weaponized. And that's why I'm gonna bring up the disclosure again. That's why these disclosures are such an intricate process. And I know Luke and I are very particular about how these are done because if the two individuals aren't in a space to do this where it's not going to be weaponized, I mean, we can't guarantee it, but we do our due diligence, then it's not going to be helpful. So it's to your point earlier, it's all a process.
And it's interesting because my brain went to a different place. This is okay. So brains have filters, and our filters, when information comes in, it goes through our own life experiences, our own history, our own gender, socialization, etc. So it's so interesting for me to watch. So that's where your brain went with the filter. My brain's filter went to I'm allowed to own it, apologize for it, and make amends. And I go, yeah, I get to do that, but I don't like, he doesn't get to do it. Like, meaning I don't owe him apologies. I don't need to own it for him. I don't need to make amends for him. He just has to do it for me. And so it's funny because like my protector parts are like, yeah, he better show up and he better apologize and he better do all these things for me. But I don't need to do that for him because I wasn't the one who betrayed him. So now, granted, I have plenty of things I have to apologize for and plenty of things that I do have to own, but I could not go there for a long time. And he didn't get that right for a long time. But also, like, that plays in to our relationship and our ability to trust each other and to have a trusting relationship if I have my own set of rules and he doesn't get to do that.
Right. I love that you brought that up because it is very real and I can relate to that too. And that's why all of these elements are so important because there is a time, like I mentioned earlier, to self protect while you're watching, because sometimes it's not safe for the reason I mentioned to own anything, right? And there is that time where you're like, yeah, I'm out, I'm watching. That's all I'm doing right now is watching and observing. And then when we're ready to be relational, because remember, we're talking about these in terms of being relational, then yeah, we both need to absolutely be accountable for our own stuff. But again, I like that you brought that up because I think it's important to make space and hold space for that time in the journey where you are self-protecting. I'm like, nope, watch in. You got to do some work here. Then maybe I'll choose to lean back in and we can start doing some relational pieces and I can own some stuff. But
And this is why this type of thing is why I created the leaning in group because
yeah,
I do see a lot of women get stuck in this place of wanting to forever stay in a protective place, at the same time, wanting him to come forward and do 100%. And we can have that for a season, and it's important and healthy for a season, but that can't be our ending resting place. We
right,
can't have healthy, connected relationships without coming back together at some point. And this place of coming back together, this place of starting to extend and give them room to give them room to work their process and also me leaning in vulnerability. I thought that really hard. Like I wanted it desperately. I wanted the close and connected desperately. And I fought it really hard. So I felt like I had a lot of internal battle as I navigated that part of coming back towards a relationship more.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Okay, this next one, the V for Brene has vault. I've changed it to vulnerability. And it's funny that she put vault because she's like the vulnerability queen. But, anyways, it all goes the same, I guess. I'll just read what she has and then we can add libs and stuff that I think is really important around betrayal, especially. But she says, the vault, when I share something in confidence with you, you hold what you share with me, I hold in confidence because we can only understand one side of the vault. This is where we lose trust with people. She says, so the vault is not just about the fact that you hold my confidence, it's that in our relationship, I see that you acknowledge confidentiality. So that's a lot of like how you observe them act in other with other relationships with people. So if you got someone coming to you saying, oh my gosh, did you hear Cindy's getting a divorce? And did you hear that it was all his fault? Blah, 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 blah. You can guarantee she's probably saying something about you to somebody else, right? So this is also meshes with the next one we're going to talk about is integrity. But this vault is really important because if you can't trust that this person's going to hold sacred, even for your personal information, your thoughts, your vulnerability, as you open up and share who you are to this person, then you can't trust. It's not a trusting relationship. So, vault vulnerability, I throw in there because you need to be vulnerable to have that true trusting relationship.
And here's the thing, and I see a lot of women do this, that when we're vulnerable with each other or share vulnerable information with each other, we feel closer. And so sometimes when we share other people's information, it can be our brain's way of trying to shortcut like greater connection with the person. So, say me and Amy are talking, and I start telling something about Susie, and then all of a sudden, me and Amy feel closer together. So, I will see people do that in an attempt to get closer to the person they're talking, but while actively betraying the person that they're talking about.
This isn't
And
real
so, yeah, exactly. And so one of the tools that I use with this when we're practicing learning how to be a better vault and be a safer and more trustworthy person is when we're sharing information about our and our experience. Don't share other people's experiences and other people's stories. And I'll tell you, with families, you see this all the time where I used to talk to my mom and I'd be like, hey, how's this brother doing? How's this brother doing? How are they doing? And I've been really over the years trying to practice of like, no, if I want to know how my brother Dave's doing, I need to pick up the phone and call Dave and hear how Dave's doing. Because even this process of like my mom sharing with the different kids how each kid is doing, it actually blocks the relationship between those two kids because now, like, yes, mom feels good because she gets to feel connected with each of her kids, but the siblings don't get that relationship because they're not actually building that relationship. And so I've learned,
triangulation.
yeah,
The
that when
triangulation.
I step out of other people talking about other people, it allows for healthier, stronger relationships across the board, even with my mom.
Totally. Makes so much sense. Okay. I love it. All right. Integrity. I can trust you and I can be in a trusting relationship with you if you do not act from a place of sorry, I cannot trust you and be in a relationship with you if you do not act from a place of integrity and encourage me to do the same. And then her definition of integrity is choosing courage over comfort. I love that. It's choosing what's right over what's fun, fast, or easy, and practicing your values, not just professing your values.
Okay, I'm really glad you broke down the definition of integrity because I think that especially our betrayed partners like desperately want to be in a relationship with somebody who lives with integrity. And integrity really is an internal journey process work that we have to do. And it's really value based.
Yeah.
A lot of value works and finding our integrity and finding our values and then learning how to live within them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've said this many times before, but that study done in the book, How to Not Date a Jerk or something like that, I use that with my young single adult. And one of the studies that I quote in there that they've done on couples who've been married 30 years plus, the success of it. And one of the top reasons why they've had a successful, long lasting relationship is that their values align, their core values align. And so that's a huge piece in how I help clients trust themselves and then know what they can look for as they move forward, whether it's their current relationship or they're divorced and looking for a new one. It's really being able to identify these values. And a lot of young single adults don't do that. They don't take time to really get clear and identify their values. And then they don't really know what they're looking for. And they get caught up in the easy, fast, fun and think that's connection, real connection, and it's not. So really highly recommend doing any work around values. And I think this is something that isn't just like, okay, I figured out my values at age 20, 25, don't have to worry about that again. These are ever changing. I mean, I know for me, going through betrayal and divorce, like I have a lot of core values that have shifted, thank goodness, in some of those. And so it's important to do a check-in. Just like I said, all of these different things are maintenance, right? And so Scott and I, we need to do check-ins around our core values, especially when you sense something's a little off, you know?
I love that. And in her initial thing that she says around integrity, it says, I cannot trust you and be in a trusting relationship with you if you do not act from a place of integrity, which we just talked about. But this part I really want to highlight is and encourage me to do the same.
Yeah.
That encouragement, supporting each other and each person to live within their own integrity and their own values. And I kind of see that relate even back to the boundaries is when
Oh,
you're honoring their boundaries, you're encouraging them to be in a place of integrity. And it's interesting because with each one of these, I'm seeing in my brain how just basic level of respect is part of each one of these. There needs to be a respect for each other just as human beings.
it's interesting because just a few days ago, I was having a conversation with Scott and he asked me a question and I was like, "Ooh, that's a really good question." And it took me back a minute, but I'm like, this is actually something that I think we need to ask each other more often. But he just said to me, "How does that align with your value system?" And I was like, and I had to do a little check in. Does that align with my value system? And I just loved that. He was very kind. There wasn't any judgment attached to that. It gave me space to check in with myself. And I think that is a huge part of our trusting relationship is that he, like you said, encourages me to do the same. And that was a really beautiful way to encourage me to do the same by just asking that question and then allowing me to check in with myself. And then I can answer, yeah, that actually does align with my value system. And that gave some great insight to where I'm at that he might not have realized where I'm at. And then we can have a conversation about that. So, anyways, that's a little bit of an example of how that might look tangibly.
I love it.
Okay, the next one, non-judgment. I can fall apart, ask for help, and be in a struggle without being judged by you. And you can fall apart and be in a struggle, and I will not judge you. This is hard because we're better at helping than asking, I think, a lot as women. And I think the thing that we have set up trust in relationships with people who really trust us because we're always there to help them out. But if you can't ask for help and they can't reciprocate that, then it's not a trusting relationship, period.
My brain is going so many
I
places,
know.
right? So many places because I can't get over this first part where it says, I can fall apart and ask for help and be in a struggle without you being judgmental. I could see a lot of my partners who have acted out or have compulsive sexual behaviors,
Flip
you
this.
yeah, weaponize that and go, I'm having a hard time, like, and literally put their weight and their problems and their issues on their partners. And I think that can happen more often than not because when somebody is beginning their journey of tackling compulsive sexual behaviors, you do feel out of control and you feel like you're falling apart and it can feel really scary and overwhelming and too big. And so to then go like, okay, honey, spouse, partner, whatever, you're not supposed to be judging me and here, like here's my stuff. And
Right.
I want to be like super, super clear that you can have non-judgment and not take any on, and also have non-judgment and not hold it or own it or even have compassion for it. Non-judgment is a place of just non-judgment. And the truth is betrayed partners, because of their pain and their trauma, for a long time are probably not going to be capable of non-judgment. And so I don't want to put extra pressure on my betrayed partners
Mhm.
in those beginning stages, or if there's still not safety being created, I don't want any pressure that they need to be non-judgmental. Like, yeah, that would be a great place to get to as we do our healing, but betrayed partners, your only responsibility in those beginning stages is to take care of you and little kids if you have them. We don't want to abandon our children, but it's to honor you what you're needing and honor your healing and take care of you. And so if you don't have it in you to hold anything, and I don't want you holding anything, and to be non-judgmental, that's okay. It is okay to have an incubator right now. And this
Yeah.
goes back to what we talked about earlier, that this is not what we want forever. If you're years and years into it and there's safety being created, then we might need to do some work on creating within you being able to be more non-judgmental with people around you. And usually when we're super judgmental or critical with others, we're critical and non-judgmental or judgmental with ourselves. So usually it just means that's where our work starts.
Exactly. And that's how I would betrayal trauma this up is I always start with the self-judgment. And so that's how I would frame this for our audience in her N for non-judgment. It's don't judge yourself and just or pay attention to when you are. Be aware of how you are judging yourself. When these big huge breach in the relationship of trust, right, has happened, like we've said before, we're not doing the maintenance work. So, to your point, in this regard, absolutely, I think this goes for the betrayer. They have to work on this non judgment of themselves because of all the shame that is creating a lot of the issues, right? So, I think this is a great one that we can say, let's split this up between individual partners doing not judging ourselves. And then, like you said, we can move into non-judgment of the other person. That's just maintenance work, though. That's totally when there's enough safety.
Okay. So it's funny because even when you say for the person who has acted out that they need to have non-judgment for themselves, I have heard women literally say, no, he needs to have judgment. He needs to have judgment for himself. And so it's funny because I think sometimes it can be scary of if he doesn't have judgment for himself, then he's going to give himself a free pass and he's not going to do what's
Yeah.
required.
Let me
And
explain.
I was
If
going to say, so can we break down that a
yeah,
little bit more? Because non-judgment is very different than being accountable. So please.
correct. Correct. Because what we're doing is we're either shaming, judging, or blaming, which takes us out of acceptance, which takes us out of accountability. So we don't want them to be in that judgment shame side of the pendulum because it keeps them out of accepting the reality of what they are doing, what they are choosing, and the impact that's having. And so we want to avoid the blame shifting, the blaming, that victim mentality or shaming, judging. That's where any of us can get stuck in denial, minimizing, justifying. All of that keeps you out of reality, out of awareness and acceptance that leads to change. Like you said, they're afraid because they're like, hold on, if he doesn't judge himself and feel the shame and all this about what he did to me, he's not going to change. And so that's why these principles, these tools are so important to really understand. And what I love about what Renee is doing really is defining this language, creating a universal definition for these terms so that we can be more understanding and aware of why we're talking about non judgment, what that really means. It means owning the reality of your actions and being accountable.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. G, generosity. A relationship This is gonna go in what we were talking about before, but Brene says, "Our relationship is only a trusting relationship if you can assume the most generous thing about my words, intentions, and behaviors, and then check in with me. So if I screw up, say something, or forget something, you will make a generous assumption. Compassion and kindness builds trust." So everything we've been talking about, let's betrayal trauma this one up a little bit as well.
Okay. So when I do couples work, I remember being in grad school and in a course on doing couples work. They said that there are three critical assumptions, yeah, three critical assumptions that are needed to be able to do couples work. And the first one was believe that your partner has good intentions with what they're saying and doing. So I brought this up in one of my groups recently. And this was my leaning in group, so people who have been at this a little bit longer, and I knew that this would bring up a big response, and it did, because when trust has been so shattered, to give generosity towards their intentions feels so scary and so dangerous. And so we're gonna repeat everything we just said, but this is not a beginning level thing, and it's not something that we can just do, and if there's not safety being created, your brain's not gonna offer any level of generosity. Actually, that's not true. I have some partners who offer generosity when there's no trust.
There's no trust.
But
Well,
yeah,
something that comes up for me, and I guess yeah, it fits in. So just an example again. So my brain has to put an example with it to make it more tangible. But just that word intention stood out to me. And just the other night, I don't think this is TMI. Scott was scratching my back and playing with my hair. And my brain immediately went to ugh, he's going to want to have sex. He's going to want more. He's doing this because he wants more. That's his intention. And I just laid there, let him continue to scratch my back and rub my hair. And he actually fell asleep and started snoring. And it was an interesting experience for me because I watched my body then relax, and I didn't realize how tense I was. And now he's never done anything to breach that or make me question, but this is a trauma response, right? And I'm telling you all the time how, like, like, yes, I still have triggers and trauma responses, and I'm still trying to trust this new relationship. And this was a great example of being able to trust his intentions because that's not what happened in the other relationship. And so, because of this experience, I can be more generous with his intentions because there wasn't an expectation in there that led to a big, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a bigger trust behavior. Like sexual intimacy is a big trusting behavior. Scratching a back is a smaller one. It's the trust in these smaller maintenance things that allows me to feel safer in the bigger things. And I think that's really important to pay attention to. It's like coming home from work, right? I'll be home at 6, he's home at 7. It's trusting in those little in accountability, reliability, all these little things that adds up to being able to trust the big.
yeah. In the book Worthy of Her Trust, he uses the analogy of little Lego pieces.
Like, yeah,
We want
that's
to build
right.
a big house of trust, but it's every little tiny Lego brick at a time.
Yeah.
It's how we build up the trust. And so I think even with generosity, I think especially after betrayal, generosity is earned
Mhm.
with each one of those little Lego bricks being put down. And when we do things that are untrustworthy, that can knock down a wall of Lego pieces, and we have to go back and start rebuilding them piece by piece.
Yep. So again, I think this is super helpful for both partners. Slow this down. And really the pattern, if you can see in each one of these categories that we've gone over, I think you've already mentioned this, Alana, but it's worth repeating. You can see how this is not a checklist. This is not, let's put this on the wall and check, check. Every single one of these areas take time, take healing, take help, work. I mean, all the things.
It's a
But it
journey.
is such a great tool to use to help you identify more specifically where you might be lacking trust or where you might need that person to rebuild trust around. This is where I think sometimes I'll hear women overgeneralize and over trust and can that just sets you up for more trauma because they might be respecting your boundary that you just created and you're like, "See, great. I can go ahead and let down my guard or I can let even the boundary down." So this is, I think, going to be really awesome to look at all of these different elements. Okay, we've got boundaries going. All right, now let's see if reliability is going. Let's see if accountability is going. And just notice and watch.
I love this, and I it's funny. I love our podcast episode. I love that we got to talk about this topic. I love Brene Brown's work, and I can think of multiple clients who could benefit from this. I think all of us, just as humans who are going through this world who want to be able to trust, because there's such a beauty in being able to trust somebody. It feels really good. One of the number one questions I get from betrayed partners and their partners alike is, how do we build trust? How is trust regained? I get that from both sides.
Yep.
So listen to this, re-listen to this, go listen to Brene Brown's. You can look it up on YouTube where she does her talk on this. It's not betrayal traumatized like we have just done, but it can also just add another layer to it.
Yeah.
So
Really quickly, a great place to start is when you can't even lean into the relationship right now. Okay. Especially for these new D Day, go through all of these different elements and apply them to yourself. Because that is, I think, the most important part is working on that trusting yourself first. Just like I've always like learning to love yourself first. All of these things for yourself first is how you can make space for someone else. So, do you hold your own boundaries? I'm always thinking, did I go to bed when I said I wanted to go to bed? Am I doing these things? Can I trust myself? Am I reliable? Can I rely on me to hold space for my emotions? Am I accountable for my actions? Like, go through all of that, apply it to you first, work on trusting yourself. It's a great place to start when you're just like, hell no, not doing that relationally yet. Totally okay. Start with you.
it always begins with you every time with all of the work.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. We love having you with us, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.